This is something that happened when I was no more than 8 years old. As a child, I spent a lot of time with my grandma. The reason why, I can't really say. Maybe I liked her house and the food better. My grandma had these 2 other females that would come over every weekend, and they would sit, drink wine, and gossip about other people. Next door to her was this middle-aged man that lived with his mother, sister, and 2 brothers. They all lived together, and all of them were odd and mean, except for the middle-aged man. Henry was his name. He was odd, but nice and very quiet. He would come over time to time on the weekend, and while my grandma and the ladies would sit and talk in the dining room, he would sit on the sofa and watch TV with me. One weekend, the ladies were sitting and sipping their wine as usual, and Henry watching TV with me. One of my grandma's lady friends, I won't put her name because she's now dead, not due to what I'm telling you in this story. One of my grandma's lady friends was drunk, rambling about how she can't stand that motherfucker. Grandma and the other friend was telling her to calm down. I wasn't thinking much of it, because she was known to drink a little too much and run off at the mouth. She stands up and says, "I can't be around him. Let me go home before I do something." She starts at the door, and then turns around and puts a cigarette out on his head. Henry jumps up, runs past me, grabs the lady, and tosses her against the wall. I see picture frames and all kinds of other stuff being smashed over Henry's head. I'm still trying to figure out what just happened. Henry pulls back from her, and I see a knife covered in blood. My grandma's friend's standing against the wall, looking and holding her stomach. My grandma and her friend are screaming at Henry to get out. Right before my grandma grabs me and covers my face, I happen to glance at the lady's stomach, and seeing her insides hanging down. Sorry for the gruesome details. After that night, I heard nothing else about what happened. I just know I didn't see Henry for years. My parents ended up moving to a new neighborhood a few years later, and our next door neighbor just happened to be the normal sister of Henry, one that I never met before. I could have seen her around before, being we lived in such a small country town in Alabama. Henry was living with her. He would walk the street every day with a chopped off wooden brown stick, with a nail in the bottom. And whenever I was outside, he would speak and call me by name, like nothing ever happened. Like he didn't damn near murder a lady in front of a kid me. Crazy thing to the story is in high school, I ended up dating his niece, the one who was birthed by the normal side of the family. This happened when I was roughly 9 to 10 years old. My brother Luke was 2 years younger than me, so he would have been about 7. We played in a pretty safe suburb in a small city in Australia. Most often, particularly in summer, us kids would be out after dark, playing Spotlight and other nighttime games with our neighborhood friends. We lived in a street where most people knew each other and would look out for the kids in the street. One particular time, during summer, after dinner, my brother and I went back outside to play. School holidays meant we didn't have to come back inside until about 8 p.m. Because none of our friends would come out to play, we decided to take our dog for a walk to the park. This park was about a 10-minute walk from our house. To get to the park, you could either walk by the pathway, which went behind houses on neighboring streets, then went through an underpass, which had a main road on top. Another way to go was via a main road that our street ran off. The main road went parallel to the pathway and hooked up to another main road which crossed over that pathway, creating the underpass. My brother and I decided to go the back way through the underpass as we could race each other this way. Both my brother and I played sports, so even though we were young, we could run fast. About halfway to the park, I was slowing down because I thought I heard rustling in the bushes behind me. I didn't think much of it and continued on. We got to the park and hung around for a bit. When it started to get dark, we decided to head home. As we got closer to the underpass, my brother was lagging behind me. I noticed a big figure in the underpass, with what looked like a big dog. We kept walking for a bit. My heart started to beat a bit faster. My brother hadn't noticed at this point, when my dog started to get anxious. My brother looked up at this point, and kind of looked at me. We kept going, but a lot slower this time. As we got within 15 meters of the underpass, I could tell this person was a male, quite tall and large. He was leaning against the wall of the underpass, facing us. I was already feeling really off, but my stomach pretty much fell into my butt by this point. We had to make a decision to either turn around, go through the underpass, and pretty well come into straight contact with this guy, or go back via the main road. I said to my brother, "Luke, let's go to the main road." He agreed straight away, so we veered a slight right, which led us up the slight hill to the main road, almost on top of the underpass. We crossed the road and started heading straight home. We both immediately felt a lot safer. We hadn't gone far when I started to feel funny again. I turned around, and back in the distance, the guy was running towards us. I freaked out. I called out to my brother to look behind him, and he just turned to me and said, "Let's run." We both bolted. I turned around a couple times. This guy was close enough to us that he could catch up to us, but still far away enough that it wouldn't have looked weird to cars passing by. By this point, we had turned into our street, not looking behind us, still going as fast as we could. When we got to our house, we were both exhausted. My brother went straight inside. I turned around and noticed that the guy was about 100 meters behind and was slowing down to a stop. I quickly went inside. We never saw this person again, that I know of, but from then on, we were a lot more hesitant to go out late. I grew up in Wolverhampton in the West Midlands, UK. I was 12 years old, and let's just say I didn't have the easiest of upbringings. I was smoking, drinking, and staying out late around this time of my life. So, I was bunking off school, my mom was at work, and it was late morning time, around 11 a.m. I wanted to buy some cigarettes, but as I was well into the legal age was 16 at this time, I had to hang around outside the shop and ask strangers if they would take my money and purchase them for me. About a mile and a half from my house, there was a little shop called The Spar. It was on a fairly busy road. A row of hedges lined one side, with a gap that led into the field beyond, and houses on the opposite side. So I was standing maybe 10 paces from the shop, waiting for people to walk past so I could ask them to purchase my cigarettes. I usually second-guessed if they would be willing by how they looked. I asked a lady, maybe mid-40s, shoulder-length blonde hair, black business trousers, pink elbow-length jumper, looked like she smoked. She said no. I asked a guy, maybe mid-50s, shaved brown hair. He was wearing blue jeans and a white shirt. He ignored me. So, I was getting desperate by this point and decided upon asking anybody that came by. Then I see a rather disheveled looking man coming up the road towards me past the row of hedges. He was wearing dirty dark brown suit trousers and a buttoned up dark brown, but not the same shade of brown, dirty velvet jacket. He had a black bowler kind of hat on, and he kind of limped a little as he walked. As he got closer to me, and I was trying to suss out if he looked like the type that would possibly purchase a 12-year-old cigarettes, I noticed that he was probably homeless, and possibly in his late 50s, early 60s. But I thought, he probably smokes, I'll ask him. As he approached me, I gave him the usual line. "Excuse me, mate, would you please go into the shop and get some fags for me?" He stopped and thought for a second, then said, "How old are you?" I lied. "I'm 15, almost 16. Then he said, "Alright, which ones do you want?" and held out a really dirty hand. I gave him my money and asked him to get me 10 sovereign. I had the exact change. He goes into the shop and I'm waiting outside excited. I'm finally getting my cigarettes. I can go home and chill out before I have to leave the house again to make it look like I've just got home from school. He comes out and gives me 20 sovereign. I'm miffed to say the least and say, "But I only gave you enough money for 10. And I start panicking because I don't have any extra money on me to give him. At this point, he hooks my arm in his very lightly holding my arm very firmly to his side, and starts to walk back towards the Hedgeline Road. All the while, he's telling me how I can make up for not having the extra money for the cigarettes. I'm kind of stunned at this point, and my mind is blank. I guess I was in some kind of shock. He leads me through the gap in the hedges and into the field, all the while talking non-stop, still briskly walking with my arm locked in his. He's telling me how I can come to his house and help him fix the roof tiles. I'm still in silent shock. The field is huge, and I can see it leads into more fields and more fields. I can hear the cars behind me getting more distant. I can't see any houses for miles. There's just fields. He's still talking, but I'm not taking in what he's saying. My mind starts to race. I finally realize that something about this isn't quite right, and I have to get away. As he's still walking, still holding my arm, I suddenly and violently pull back, with my arm straight. It slides my arm out of his very quickly, and he goes flying forwards and lands in a heap on the floor, and I take one big step backwards. I'm terrified at this point, but still in shock. I can't speak. He's laying on the ground, groaning, holding his leg, like he's in a lot of pain. "Why'd you do that for? It really hurt me. Help me up, help me up." He's holding his leg and holding his hand out for me to help him up. I'm frozen. My mind is racing so fast. I'm looking at this disheveled man right in the eyes, laying on the ground, groaning like he's in pain. But something about the situation didn't sit right with me. My gut was telling me to run. Don't help him up. "I brought you those cigarettes, didn't I? I helped you out. Why'd you do this? You've hurt me. Help me up." I take another step backwards, all the while looking into his green eyes. All of a sudden, he stops groaning and asking for me to help him up. He points his finger at me, looking me right in the eye, and says, "You're a smart girl." It was like an electric shock ran through my body, and I turn and run. I don't look back, I just run as fast as I can. When I've gotten off the Hedgeline Road and turn into the next road, I slow as I'm out of breath. I start bawling my eyes out and I'm shaking uncontrollably. I keep checking behind me, catch my breath, and don't stop running until I get home. Least to say, I was terrified I'd bump into the man again, and I never try to buy cigarettes from that shop ever again. Alright, so I'm fairly new to Reddit, more of an on-again, off-again lover at this point, and I'm mobile bound, so please excuse formatting. I've been reading a few of these, and it got me thinking about the things that have happened to me in my life so far, and the one that stood out to me the most was Mr. Pinky. Mr. Pinky is what I call my mom's now ex-friend, because I was too young at the time to remember his first name, and he had a balding head that was primarily pink most of the time. I met Mr. Pinky when I was around 6 or 7 years old, in my 3rd grade year of school. He was a family friend that had stopped by. I believe he was traveling at the time, but my memory isn't the best because, as previously stated, I was 6 to 7 at the time. However, I do remember him coming to stay at our house, and he seemed like a genuinely cool guy. He was fun and joked around with me a lot, which made me happy, because my sister was just old enough to be in the phase where she didn't like to hang out with me anymore. Regardless of that act, he seemed to be actually interested in what I had to say and played games with me. Towards the end of the first night of him being there, my mom had gone to her room to settle down, and I was in the living room watching a movie. I believe it was Happy Feet, or Ice Age, with Mr. Pinky. He asked me if I wanted to sit beside him on the couch, and being the young child I was, I agreed. We sat for a while, and then he suggested we lay down so we would be more comfortable, and again, I went along, because I was too young for my creep meter to go off. After a while of watching the movie, he began to trace his hands on my hips and stomach, over my clothes, and I would swat his hands away and tell him to stop, because it tickled. He laughed, and I laughed, and that should have been the end of that. He didn't stop, and eventually moved his hands under my clothes after some point, and by then I had started to feel a little bit uncomfortable, but wasn't sure how to make it stop. By some miracle, I heard my mother calling me into her bedroom, and I excused myself and made my way to her room. She asked me what all the commotion was about, and I relayed the events to her. I've never seen such a mixture of concern and anger in my mother's face before, and I remember the conversation and actions we had very clearly. "So, he was touching you?" was her first question after I had explained the events to her, which confused me because in my head I was thinking, didn't she hear what I had said to her? But I didn't say that because talking back might get me in trouble. "Yes, Mommy," I responded, moving to sit on the bed beside her as she motioned for me to. I figured I was probably in trouble, but I wasn't really sure why, and that had me close to tears because I usually knew what I did wrong when I was in trouble. "Under your clothes or over?" she asked me, and my brows furrowed because I wasn't sure why she was asking this. I figured it was fine because I was young and I was used to my mom helping me change when I was younger, so I really didn't see a difference between that and Mr. Pinky at first for some reason. "Over and then under," I responded quietly, and I swear I saw my mother's fists and jaw clench simultaneously. She seemed so angry, and I was afraid I'd get a spanking for reasons I was unsure of. "And where did he touch you?" she asked. That would be her final question of the conversation. "On my tummy and around my upper legs," I responded lastly, and she froze for a minute before pulling me closer and brushing her fingers through my hair. It helped to calm me, but now I was mostly just confused about what was happening at the moment. She kisses the top of my head and tried to appear calm, but even at that age, I knew how my mother was when she was angry. She instructed me to stay in her room and gave me the binder full of DVDs before she left to go to the living room. It was quiet for a long time, and I sat watching a movie when the door opened and Mr. Pinky walked in and smiled at me. "Hey, Cupcake, we're going to go to the mountains tomorrow before I leave. We'll have lots of fun, okay?" That was the last sentence he ever said to me, giving my thigh and knee a long stroke before he left the room and left me alone. I remember going to sleep after that, waking up to my mom putting me in the car early in the morning and dropping my sister and I off at our grandparents' house early in the morning. Years later, I asked my mother about this experience, and she informed me that she took him to the airport, filed a police report against him, and he wasn't seen again. She kept tabs on him though, and he apparently became a Sunday school teacher and was arrested for sexually harassing the children. I haven't questioned her again about it, but may soon. I have no idea if he's still in jail, but if I ever see him again, it won't be fun for him. Growing up, I lived in a small town an hour or so outside a big city. It was quiet, many farms and a few nice cul-de-sacs with beautiful villas. There were 15 villas on the road my parents bought a house on, and I was 2 and had my very own room secured for future use. My bigger sister, Emily, got the larger room, of course. It was a 1-story house with a basement turned TV room, master bedroom, and laundry room. But even though I was on the first floor, you couldn't see into my room without a chair or anything else to stand on. I felt safe. My room was located at the front of the house, window facing the front yard and street, and with only the staircase down to the basement separating it from the front door. Emily's room was facing the other way, with the window out towards the backyard. Under my window was a little patio with garden furniture, 2 chairs, sofa, and a table, where many summer days were spent eating ice cream. As the years went by, these furniture came in handy for Emily, who had a habit of going to bed early and then sneaking out through her window to meet friends. As she couldn't get back in through her own window, she would bully me into keeping my window ajar, so that she would be able to sneak back into my room when the time came and she felt ready to come home. I believe I was 13 and she's 16 at the time. I was a heavy sleeper, so it never bothered me. I'd rather just stay out of it all and turn a blind eye. One summer's evening, I did wake up when she finally came home. I could hear her fidgeting around outside on the patio. Tired as I was, I turned around and went back to sleep, and hearing my dad's heavy footsteps up the stairs from the master bedroom, I assumed a big row was about to take place. Better stay out of it. But no argument came. The shuffle outside stopped, and I drifted back to sleep, not thinking more about it. What happened in the morning scares me to this day. My mom wakes me up to ask me if I heard anything out of the ordinary during the night. Not wanting to rat my sister out, I said, "No. Why?" She takes me to the patio, and on top of the white table are two massively muddy footprints, way too big to belong to a 16-year-old girl. After that night, I never left my window open, angry sister or not. I do not want to meet the man who has stood outside my window in the middle of the night. I can only assume my dad's nightly cigarette on the back porch scared him off, and I'm incredibly thankful for that. Growing up until I was 7 years old, I lived in a small house with a medium-sized backyard that had a fence that met the neighbor's yard. This fence also ran down to a narrow and long garage that lined the rest of what separated the next-door neighbor's yard and mine. Looking back on this, I realized how bad this could have gone, but as a kid I was very trusting. When I got to the age that I could play in the fully fenced yard on my own, around 6 years old, my dad told me I could only play in certain areas and not go in others, one of them being anywhere near that fence line. Well, whether I forgot his rule or didn't think it mattered in this situation, I remember one day a man coming to the fence line to greet me. He seemed very nice and friendly, and since my parents had raised me with a strong respect for adults, I saw no reason to go say hi, as I was a very social kid. We talked, and then he left, and that was it. This just talking happened for a while. When it was nice out and I was alone, he would sometimes come to the fence and say hi. Not a lot, but over the course of a summer, maybe 10 times. I truthfully can't remember what the conversations were like, but I do remember feeling like he was one of my closest friends. I didn't know it then, but he was grooming me. A summer of this ended, and eventually the next summer came, with me being a year older and still very naive. I believe I had told my mom about my friend in the backyard, but she thought I was talking about an imaginary friend, or the neighbor girl that would come over sometimes. For that summer, the same greetings began. This summer, though, he began inviting me over, saying he had a pool and that we could go swimming, which sounded so fun to me, but I knew my parents wouldn't let me, so I said no many times. One time, when I was at the fence line talking to the neighbor, my dad came out, and I told him to meet my friend. My dad became absolutely furious. He raced over and told me to never ever talk to him ever again, that he was a very bad man, and for me to go in the house. When I was headed for the house, I remember listening to him yell at the neighbor, with threats to never talk to me again. I wasn't talked to about it after that. Well, because I felt angry with my dad for yelling at me, he had a temper, and saying the next door neighbor was a bad man, I decided I would continue to talk to the neighbor, because I thought, deep in my heart, he was good. The next time we met at the fence, he gave me a mood ring, saying it was his late wife's, and I deserved it because I was pretty. Then a few times after that, when he asked me to come over to go swimming, I gave in and said why not, because I really wanted to go swimming. I got my bathing suit from home to bring it over, and I walked around the fence and began walking to behind his house, where the pool was with the man. My dad had randomly decided to go outside to the garage and saw me walking with him. He ran over, grabbed me, yelling in the process, and called the cops. Cops showed up. He got arrested and sent to jail for a little bit. And my dad finally told me the truth. Apparently, he was a registered child sex offender with a nasty charge and wasn't allowed to talk to kids at all for the rest of his life, or he would be sent back to jail for some time. Also, there was no water in his pool, I later found out. I feel like the icing on the cake is that my dad, being the only one that knew the situation, did a horrible job of explaining the danger and instead made me want to prove him wrong out of anger. Later on in life, when my parents got divorced, my dad, brother, and I were all invited to a swimming party at their house, with the guy there fresh out of jail, and my dad was okay with the situation because he would be there. But not only that, he really wanted us all to go as a family. I said no because I felt scared, even though my dad persisted. Parents, please don't be selfish.